Welcome back to the Black Pill. Today's talk is about suicide ideation. Suicide ideation is just when it occurs to you that it's possible that you could commit suicide. It's when it occurs to you that you could die. That's different from suicide intent. Suicide intent is when you have a plan to die. It's different from suicide planning, when you're thinking about what it would take and acquiring the materials. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not your psychologist. If you have ideation, it's been around for a while, that's what we're talking about. If you're making a plan, if you intend to die, don't hang out here. Get off this site right now and get help. Call a therapist, call a crisis line. Despair kills. We need you. We need you around. Turn this off. Get help. If you're still here, I assume you don't intend to die. But the thought sometimes occurs to you. For people like me, suicide ideation is a common experience, a persistent experience. It happens to me in normal times, normal days, maybe 3 to 5 times a day. I attempted suicide 30 years ago, give or take, and I promised myself, it was a weak attempt, and obviously I survived it, and it was even a little embarrassing. I just promised myself after that I would never attempt suicide again. But the thoughts persist. Without the intent, the thoughts persist. It's in my self-talk. The things we mutter to ourselves when we don't think anybody else is around. Yeah. It's in my consciousness. Sometimes it's a little intrusive. Usually not. And 3 to 5 times a day, maybe more than that if something stressful is happening. Things that I can't predict. Social interactions are always unpredictable. Work check-ins. Those can prompt a bit more suicide ideation. Does that sound familiar? Body integrity is our last bastion of control. Rotter proposed the idea of locus of control in the 1950s, and this is just a rough gauge of how much control a person thinks they have over their outcomes, their destiny. Are you the captain of your own ship, or is fate a god that micturates upon your life periodically from a great height and unpredictably? Is life capricious? The idea has a lot of explanatory power. It's a useful idea, a useful frame for the experience. And as usual, this video won't be definitive, but some people will find it helpful to formulate their own experience as a lens for what they're going through. Again, today we're talking about ideation rather than intent. And for intent, the issue generally isn't control. It's more likely to be pain. That people have experiences that seem to be both intolerable and inescapable. Yeah, this pain cannot be borne and it cannot be survived. It can't be lived through. Suicide would seem like the only reasonable out under those circumstances that sometimes press upon us. And of course, it isn't really true that the thing cannot be either born or survived. The person is living with their experience. They're not fine, they don't feel fine. But there is an other side. That is, on the other side of this experience, there is better. Okay. And as far as your brain is concerned, physical pain and emotional pain are the same thing. So there's no need for any meaningless distinctions there. Yeah. Physical torture, man, depression can feel so much like that. Embarrassment and shame seem to physically inhabit the body in the same way that pain does. So the inescapable, intolerable pain is more likely even to be emotional than physical. Ironically, at the very bottom of the depression curve, when things are at their worst, that isn't even the riskiest time for suicide, because people can feel so hopeless and so helpless and so apathetic that even suicide doesn't seem like an option, that people don't even have the energy for it, and they can't imagine even getting that right, or that even that would help and release them from their suffering. It's having bottomed out and starting to come up a little bit, when people feel slightly more energetic and slightly more motivated, that is the riskiest time for suicide in the depression curve. Again, if that's you, shut this shit off and go get some help right now. For those of us with just ideation and no intent, the experience again can be somewhat intrusive and persistent. I started to track mine, and I noticed that it just happens more when I'm approaching unpredictable situations or uncontrollable situations. So, as a person who experiences autism, people can be really difficult to read. Social situations make me anxious, and the ideation comes up. Things to do with work, meetings, they're unpredictable. Anything could happen. Email is unpredictable. Anything can happen there. And so, yeah, yeah. So those would be sort of the times when I'd experience more ideation. And like a couple years ago, I got to go to the beach in Mexico and hang around in the groomed white sand and look at fishes and drink tequila. And those days were absolutely free of suicide ideation. They were safe and predictable. So your locus of control, again, is how much you feel like you are in charge of a given set of circumstances. How much ability do you have to shape your destiny? And people who have an internal locus of control, they feel like they're the captain of their ship, and whether they arrive safely at their destination or navigate a social situation is largely up to them. And for the rest of us, we feel anxious. Self-efficacy, that ability to feel competent and therefore confident, that pretty much depends on an internal locus of control. So there's a series of experiments on dogs, and hopefully I've remembered to put in the content warning at the start. And here's where it would apply: mistreatment of animals, content warning. Here we go. So in the experiments, there's a cage, a kennel, and the floor can electrify. Before the floor electrifies, a little light comes on. Good. In condition 1, the whole floor electrifies. In condition 2, only half of the floor electrifies. So in condition 1, the dog has nowhere to go. They learn when the light comes on that they're getting shocked. There's nothing they can do about it. Initially, they try moving to different places. It doesn't help. They try jumping, but the shock is a good 3 seconds long, and they can't jump high enough to stay in the air for 3 seconds. When the light comes on, they're getting shocked, and they learn to just take it. They learn helplessness. And so the dog just curls up in a corner, and they watch the light, but when it comes on, they just brace themselves, and the shock happens, and they just take it. And that dog is maladjusted. They're not friendly, they're listless, they might pace around, they're prone to biting, Um, Learned helplessness looks an awful lot like depression in human beings. The second dog, when the light comes on, they just learn to go to the other side of the cage where the floor doesn't electrify. And they're fine. They're happy and well adjusted and friendly, and they eat, and just life is normal, right? So that dog has, I guess, the equivalent in humans of an internal locus, and the other one has learned it doesn't matter what they do, they're getting shocked. They've learned helplessness. Um, yeah, happiness is a delusion. An internal locus of control is somewhat delusional. Here's the thing, depressed people are smarter than average. Yeah. I'll make that case more strongly in a different video. There isn't really time to make the whole case here and now. But depressed people tend to be smarter and more realistic than average. You shouldn't try to talk a depressed person out of depression with platitudes and get over it and everything's going to be fine, because it's not going to be fine. Man, we're all going to die. And we're all going to get sick and suffer first, probably. Everyone you love is going to get sick and suffer and die, and none of your pets are going to outlive you, you know? As Eric Idle famously saying, life's a piece of shit when you look at it. And that's true. There's no way around it. There's no way around the fact that life's a piece of shit. Can't talk people out of that. An internal locus of control is delusional. Like, you get on the highway, you have a long way to go. Past a certain basic level of competence, how much does your safe arrival at your destination really depend on your individual skill as a driver? The answer is realistically not that much. How many drivers are on the road who aren't you? Well, all but one of them. We just had a highway remodel a few years ago here, and the road crews, they burned out the white lines, the lane lines in the road, and painted new temporary lines. But in the rain, at sunrise, if the road was wet, you couldn't see the new white lines. You could only see the divots. And there are 3 or 4 really good accidents there every single morning. And that was not to do with the skill of individual drivers. That was to do with the road. An internal locus of control is ultimately delusional. Life is largely chaos and randomness, and bad things happen. No matter what you do, bad things happen. In the modern age, as fascism rises all around us and climate change continues unabated, and we don't have the will apparently to do anything about climate change, and democracy is collapsing, it just can look like there's no sense in having any kind of internal locus. But to be functional or well-adjusted, or whatever sort of modern mental health words you want to use, to experience any capacity for optimism or happiness, you kind of have to have that internal locus. Like, it's a delusion, but it's a kind of necessary self-delusion, right? If you're that person on the highway thinking about all the things that could go wrong that aren't in your control, you could start to drive so carefully you cause the accident that you were afraid of. And spending every warm day attributing the warmth to climate change is no recipe for a happy or meaningful or productive life. In fact, it can lower your self-efficacy to the point where you stop trying, right? Then despair sets in, really sets in. And for most people, despair just is not survivable. So the last bastion of control is our own bodies. Yeah? When your life is chaos, you can at least control whether you eat today and how much. Like, people are getting into half-day fasting or full-day fasting just as a practice to exercise control over their will, over their eating. People go to the gym to try to change the shapes of their bodies, and that's also kind of a will to power thing, where You don't want to go to the gym, and you go to the gym anyway because you do want to go to the gym. And it's the part of you that does overcoming the part of you that doesn't, overcoming your own inertia. That's control. That's control. In a big, chaotic, out of control universe, that's control. Anorexic people, not always, but sometimes the crux of the matter is they can't control what's going to happen to them today. They can't control how their family's going to treat them and whether their teachers are nice and whether their friends notice the zit on their face, but they can control whether they eat. And that can be super addictive. So, flirting with death, suicide ideation, it's pretty common to autistic people. We tend to be socially isolated. Even if we have friends, we can't trust that they really like us or really love us. That's difficult for us to do. And when they tell us they love us, we wonder why. Is that true? Why would anybody actually love me? It's very difficult. There's the feeling of alienation, of always being the alien anthropologist. Like we drop down from another world and we're trying to figure people out and we're trying to, scientifically understand the people around us because we can't directly at the gut level understand the people around us. These and a host of other factors, including the cruelty of other people, especially the cruelty of children when you're a child and you go to that horrible place they call a high school. These factors make suicide ideation and attempts about 3 times more likely in autistic people than in the general population. A large percentage of that is female humans who experience autism. Among females, the number is 8 times. Man, for me, this isn't going away. Like if I could live on that beach and be plied with alcohol by beach butlers, then I probably wouldn't have this experience. But since I have to live among humans and go to work, it isn't going away. It's happening. That's a thing that's happening. So when it occurs to me that I could kill myself, I have to do something else. I can't make the thought stop. It's gonna happen. So I have to do something else. I have to find some meaning and some use in it. Try to understand the thought, where it comes from, and even how it might be helping me. I've learned to recognize this as a coping strategy. A good coping strategy? A healthy coping strategy? One I'd recommend to other people? Fuck no, obviously not. But the one that I have, it's mine. It's my coping strategy. You see, what it does is it makes engagement voluntary. It makes engagement voluntary. There's a scene in Lethal Weapon. What year was that? 1987? Lethal Weapon. And Riggs, he's finally breaking down and telling Murtaugh just how much pain he's in. Like every night, he pulls out the bullet that he keeps in his pocket for this purpose, and he puts it in his revolver. And he doesn't have a revolver. He's a modern man. He has an automatic. Whatever. And he puts it in his mouth. He thinks about pulling the trigger. And that's supposed to be this massive confession of despair. There's nothing to live for, and so all I can do is contemplate ending it, and in the end, I choose not to. That's a horrible scene. I don't know what the writers intended with that. In the end, though, there's this existential dimension where Riggs is confronting the choice of whether to live or die. And in choosing to live, his life is more decisional than Murtaugh's life. Murtaugh just goes on living. Regardless of what happens to him, he just enacts sort of this script he was handed at birth. In the script, the character always goes on living, surviving. Yeah. But Riggs doesn't have to. Riggs has an out. Because at any time he could choose not to live, he is also choosing to live in a way that other people are not. And he's doing this, as he says, every goddamned day. Goddamned day. That every day he chooses to live is miserable. Maybe more miserable because he has the out. And he's suffering and he's lost his bride and it's very sad. But he is choosing. He is choosing to live. So that's kind of a sick and bass-ackward strategy, isn't it? But here we go. There are all these things that seem compulsory. Yeah, you have to work to make money. You have to make money to eat. You have to eat to live. It's also compulsory. And there are people, and there are meetings, and there are bosses who want your time, and there are so many things that just happen, like COVID just happens, and climate change is happening. No one's going to stop it from happening. But what can we do? It seems like we're forced to go through these times. As long as I'm having suicide ideation, I try to construe it as a choice that I'm making. Like a less effed up version of Riggs, I guess. I'm having the ideation, and so I'm making use of it. It means that phone that's ringing, I can choose to answer. I don't have to answer it. The party that I'm going to, the meeting with my boss tomorrow, the student complaint that I have to answer, whatever it is, I'm choosing to engage with that. It's not compulsory. And because it's a choice, because there's a serious out, because it's a choice, I know it's a sick way, I know, but it's grabbing that locus of control. It's grabbing that locus of control, and it's dragging it a little closer. It's dragging it back to me. I made a choice. I'm here today because I chose it. I'm here today because I chose to live, because I could have chosen to die, and I didn't. Yeah. One more time. This is not advocacy. Nothing here is super functional or good or ideal. It's just what's happening, because my ideation's not going away. I'm grabbing it and making it work for me. I am not at all suggesting you grab yours and make it work for you. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not your psychologist. At the same time, if there's anything in here that's helpful, grab it and use it. There you go. And if this helps you understand something about people with persistent suicide ideation, grab that and use it too. All right. This has been the Black Bill.